Hi students, welcome back to our study of environmental science. In this series of slides, we will be examining the concepts of evolution and later species diversity to start to answer the question of how species actually arise. Our learning objectives, or what you should know at the end of this presentation, are to understand how genetics of how species arise and why there are so many different species in an ecosystem. So let's look at the theory of evolution and see how this applies to the study of the environment. So why does the Earth support the astonishing biological diversity that we see around us? What determines which species will survive in one environment or another? And why are some species abundant and others are rare? These are some of the questions we hope to answer as we learn about one of the fundamental concepts in biology, evolution. Adaptation is different from acclimation. Acclimation is an individual organism's response to a changing environment. If you keep a houseplant indoors all winter and then put it out in the full sunlight in the spring, the leaves become damaged. If the damage isn't severe, your plant may grow new leaves with thicker cuticles and denser pigments that block the sun's rays. However, the change isn't permanent. After another winter inside, it will still get sun scald the following spring. The leaf changes are not permanent and cannot be passed on to offspring or even carried over from the previous year. Although the capacity to acclimate is inherited, houseplants in each generation must develop their own protective leaf epidermis. In contrast to this, we have adaptation. Adaptation affects populations rather than individuals. Genetic traits are passed from generation to generation in a population and allow a species to live more successfully in its environment. This process of adaptation to environment is explained by the theory of evolution. It was simultaneously proposed by Charles Darwin, based on his studies in the Galapagos Islands and elsewhere, and by Alfred Russel Wallace, who investigated the biology of the Malay Archipelago. The basic idea of evolution is that species change over generations because individuals compete for scarce resources. Better competitors in a population survive, giving them greater reproductive potential or fitness, and their offspring inherit the beneficial traits. Over generations, those traits become common in a population. The process of the fittest individuals passing their traits to the next generation more successfully is called natural selection. For instance, giraffes have long necks because in previous generations, long-necked individuals happened to have an advantage in finding food and in reproducing. This trait has become fixed in the population. Where do the traits that make some individuals more successful come from? Well, we know that these traits are encoded in genes, which are portions of an individual's DNA. Every organism has thousands of genes. Occasionally, random changes occur as DNA is replicated. If those random changes, or mutations, occur in reproductive cells, then they are passed on to offspring. Mutations in non-reproductive cells, such as cancers, are not inherited. Here we see an electron scanning micrograph of DNA. As we learned in the previous chapter, the DNA is a biomolecule composed of over 3 billion base pairs. The functional unit of DNA is the gene. Each gene has a single function, normally to code for a protein. Most mutations have little effect on fitness, and some can have a negative effect, but some happen to be useful in helping individuals exploit new resources or survive more successfully in new environmental conditions. We now understand the development of new species to result from many small mutations accumulating over time. So according to our understanding of the theory of evolution, it is highly unlikely that our little frog here would evolve into something like, say this. Evolutionary changes typically happen over the course of thousands and millions of years, although changes can occur more rapidly in certain instances. But evolution is also based on the principle that the changes would yield an evolutionary advantage to make the offspring better suited to the environment. So unless our photoshopped frog plans on eating a human diet, there is little advantage to having human teeth. This slide gives an example of how environmental factors can give rise to or fall to certain genetic traits. In this photograph, you see moths that are both dark and light. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, were we to visit London, England, we would be likely to see an abundance of white moths and very few dark moths. This is because the black moths stood out against the white buildings of pre-industrial London. However, the dark moths were easy for the birds to see on the white background and were preferentially hunted and eaten. However, after the start of the Industrial Revolution, the black moths came to predominate. This is because the dark moths now blended into the soot that coated most of the buildings, and the white ones now stood out and were preferentially hunted. When we think about evolution, you may find it helpful to think of it as a multi-step process. Yes, mutations do occur, but for mutation, which is embedded in the gene, to be passed down to an offspring, the mutation must be advantageous, or at least non-harmful. So the environment exerts pressure on the mutated organism, and the organism either survives or does not, based on the suitability of the mutation to survive in the environment in which the organism is living. We call this selection pressure. So a mutation is met with selection pressure from the environment, which determines if the organism will survive and reproduce or die without passing the mutated gene on to an offspring. When studying natural selection, the question often arises, how can pure chance create new complex structures or processes, much less new species? Implied here is that natural selection is a process of pure chance, which is a common misconception. Selection is not a matter of chance. The gene mutation is a function of some chance event. However, the selection is not chance at all, but the environment favoring or selecting the beneficial mutation. Furthermore, natural selection does not say that all parts of a complex system must come together all at once. Natural selection is a stepwise, constructive process which selectively builds new functional complex systems piece by piece over millions of years, often just modifying previous systems to perform new functions. This truly creative ability of natural selection is often unappreciated or even misunderstood.